Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to crumble!
I'm Joshua Kemble, and welcome to Joshua Kemble's Livestream. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 20 years. I was an art director for 9 years. And when I'm not art directing and working on illustrations and graphic designs, I'm working on comic books and graphic novels, and that's usually what I do during my streams. And while conversations can go all over the place on this stream, from spicy and entertaining to goofy and silly, one thing stays consistent throughout every stream. I'll always be working on art. So pull up a chair, get your art supplies out, and get ready for an entertaining show that'll keep you company while you work on your own personal art projects. This is Joshua Kemble's Art Stream. All right, welcome to my live stream. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Basically, just finished doing music. I think Dylan came over from here. Hi, Dylan. Just finished doing music for the night. On the music note, if you guys are curious to kind of hear some new stuff by me, check out Empty Rooms. It's by Joshua Kemble, right? On Spotify, music streaming platforms everywhere. It's kind of a darker album that deals with like a lot of things that are going on in politics, as well as like just, you know, sadness and rock and roll. So check that out. Aside from that, what we're going to be working on today. So I just recorded a little bit of music for the next solo thing, because that's just something I do on a daily basis. I think I can take these things off, which is pretty cool. But one of the things I do on a daily basis is I try to show up, do music for about 15 minutes to an hour a day, and then I'll work on my comics. So it's just a way for me to kind of keep plugging and making new music and keep doing something I care about. And I learned that actually from the comic tactic. So with the comic technique, I learned basically the same thing. So, anyhow, now it's time to work on comics. So I'm working on page 170 of Not Death But Love, the Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Let's go to where we're working on it. Boom, right here. So this is the page I have streamed. We have basically Robert, who is who's basically carrying Elizabeth out. Elizabeth's really sick. Wilson is bringing their kid, and basically Robert is carrying Elizabeth and putting her in the carriage. So that's kind of where we're at. What I'm going to do now is basically shade it. So I need to kind of take a look at the script just to remember if it says what time of day it is. I'm guessing it's going to be around the same time of day, like nighttime, but let's find out. So it's page... We have to get to page 2. My goodness. Let me just open it with pages and find the page. Dylan said I was really enjoying that song. And he said good balance. Yeah, I find it really, it's like a palate cleanser from school. Dylan said, did you see my last comment on the previous stream? If not, I'll retype it out. Yeah, I'm not sure if I did. So if you could retype it out, that'd be awesome, Dylan. Okay, so we're on page 170. And let's get through to 170 here. And let's kind of find what we've got for the description, just to see. Okay, so that's going to be the sun, and there's a carriage awaiting outside. Okay. So we're going to have the sun out. Okay, cool. I'm glad I checked. That's why it's good to check, because you never know, you know. Dylan said, yeah, you can type out the last thing. All right, so we know it's going to be sunlight, which is great. So let's do a little bit of shading. Basically, my goal is to shade this whole page before going to sleep tonight. And by the way, what's weird is for those of you, I know I have a lot of friends and listeners who live in Arizona, in Scott's neck of the woods, and don't deal with the insanity of daylight savings. But we just had daylight savings here, which is wild because there was a time a while ago where it was on the ballot to get rid of daylight savings time. It was on the voting ballot, and I think it actually passed, and then it turned out that the fine print on it was that we were voting to have a committee talk about a ballot measure. So it was weird. It's it passed, but then it they kind of pulled a fast one on us, and most people thought it was to get rid of daylight savings time. And no, it was just to make a group of people who'd meet to talk about the possibility of getting rid of daylight savings time. Because it does seem kind of archaic. I think we looked into it on stream a while ago, and it was I think it ended up being that yeah, we looked into this online, and I think it ended up being that daylight savings time was created by some English gentry man who wanted to have more time to go fox hunting. It's some rich dude. Anyhow, Dylan said yesterday on my way to my apartment, there was a guy. Oh yeah. I read that on the last stream. Yeah. You were talking about a guy music blaring, singing along. Nice. And he said you had a lovely conversation about music and art. Yeah. I think music is a great thing. I think art is a great thing too. Life gets kind of hectic and crazy, and it's great to have art to express deeper things of there's something about music and art that really transcend. I was going on a whole thing the other day of and now I'm blanking out on the guy. Let's see. Let me see if I can remember. Red book. Yeah, okay. So I was going on a Carl Jung kick the other day. So Jung is he's basically the psychologist who was he's the heir apparent to Sigmund Freud, and then Freud had pretty much named he mentored him and stuff, and then Jung basically broke with Freud because he was hey, it's crazy. Oh, nice. Dylan said he plays piano and guitar, and you mentioned that you draw. That's awesome. So Carl Jung was he was the heir apparent to Sigmund Freud, and kind of mentored under Freud, and helped Freud spread Freudian psychology everywhere. But then, as he got older, he broke with Freud because he was and Freud was all pissed off, which is hilarious to me in retrospect. Just why he broke with Freud. But he basically was just telling Sigmund Freud, I don't think everything breaks down to sexual desire. Because Freud kind of, his theories were that everything is driven by sex. And Carl Jung didn't agree with that. He was I think there's more to it than that. So anyhow, so Jung, you guys are probably familiar with Jung because the reason we have personality tests and stuff like that is all Carl Jung. It's all Jungian. The term extrovert, introvert, that's all Carl Jung. But and I'm sure I'm pronouncing his name wrong because I'm not a freaking psychology major. I'm an art major, okay? I'm allowed to mispronounce famous names. But anyhow, so Carl Jung had this book though, and this is what I was like. I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos about it. So he after he got like ousted by like Freud, his career was like ruined temporarily. Like he would like nobody would take him seriously. Like Sigmund Freud was like, this guy over here thinks that not everything has to do with like sexual urges, and how dare he. So like inverse. So Freud like cuts him off, and Jung has like a bit of a meltdown and kind of an identity crisis and stuff. But then he starts working on this book, and I kind of want to buy this book now, called The Red Book, and it's like, it's basically this book that like documents his like descent into madness, but it's also like done like a religious text. Like it's got like, you know, illuminated manuscript style illustrations all through it, stuff like that. And he documents like his journey, like digging into his unconscious mind. But he did a lot of stuff, like come up with like the collective unconscious, and Dylan said the occult community really loves Jung. Well, of course, because like they probably really thrive on the idea of a collective unconscious. Like the idea that we don't just have like an unconscious mind, but we also have the collective unconscious mind that's like the you know, like collectively there's kind of a spiritualism to Jung. Like one could interpret it very spiritually, but and like the idea of like meditation, a lot of stuff like that kind of came from a lot of Jungian ideas. But it's interesting to me that like, you know, it also business people really like Jung. I'm not sure how I feel about Jung, because Jung basically breaks, you know, he's one of the reasons we have those tests. Like when I was a art director, you'd have to take these like leadership tests to find out your leadership style. And I can't remember the specific, there's like a Myers-Briggs thing that like people in business are all obsessed with. They're like, you take this test, it tells you where you should work and how you should work and stuff like that. And there's some substance to it, but I still think some of it, well, I mean, I'd say Freud and Jung both have this problem where they kind of simplify people into little categories and personality types, which can be helpful for like journaling or classifying people. But I feel like sometimes like maybe we should not be classified. Excuse me. My allergies are kicking in like crazy. But anyhow, the Red Book sounds fascinating. It's like, I guess they finally published it. It was kind of a thing of myth, but it's like he documents these like crazy experiences and kind of delusions that he was having. But it was it's just really fascinating because it's like, I mean, he has like hallucinations of talking to like Isaiah the prophet, and just all these kind of weird, just bizarre like things. But what's funny to me is that there's a lot of like poetry and simile and like interesting forms of writing in it. And yet what the business world takes from that is like the Myers-Briggs test. It's like if anybody can make something kind of poetic and fascinating, like mundane and boring. It's the business world. But it's kind of like music genres. Like I used to, be kind of anti-labels and stuff. Like, why do you want to label me, man? That kind of thing. But thinking about it, like, it is helpful to have classifications and labels, right? Imagine a world where you couldn't, classify or label animals or different like species or different plants and stuff like that. Like an unclassifiable world is a world without science. So the act of doing science is, a lot of it is classification and organization, like observation. We're weird. People are weird. Human beings are weird. We make connections with things. Even the act of art is really fascinating because it's like, I've been teaching about perspective. Dylan said, I'm a little skeptical of the Myers-Briggs test, but I feel like it might be a bit better of a test since there are like 14 or 16 personality types, which is a lot more options than like 4 or 8 types. Yeah. And I mean, he was kind of revolutionary in that sense, because I think before that, one of the biggest criticisms of Freud nowadays is that fact that, like, he was all the rage back in the day, but like the more they've studied it, the more they've been like, I think the dude was a little sexually obsessed. like sometimes a cigar is a cigar. Okay. Sometimes, you know what I mean? That's kind of the old Sigmund Freud joke, is like, Freud is the guy who's like, well, we know why you're smoking a cigar, and you're like, sometimes it might actually just be a cigar. Like, but so Freud was onto some stuff, but one of the biggest criticisms of Freud is that he was a little sex obsessed. Like he added a little too much of that to everything. Because if you see the world through that lens, that Freudian lens, things get real kinky and weird real quick. But Jung is interesting. He's like, I think, a more contemporary like take on Freudian analysis, and a little he added a little more poetry and spirituality to things. And kind of the idea of the collective unconscious and stuff. I always say conscience, which is like a bad thing to say instead of conscious. Okay, I want to have a stronger shadow here, because this is like, there's a sun blaring here. But it was pretty interesting. I need to read more of Jung. And the Red Book sounds really fun to read. It sounds just like a wild book, It's like a guy who's been basically working with insane people all the time. And then he goes, what happens if I just let myself lose my mind? And then he kind of proceeds to go into the depths of just insanity. I guess there's also some skepticism of Jung in his life, because, and again, I need to read more about this, but apparently when Japan got taken over, I mean, not Japan, Germany got taken over by like Nazis and stuff, he like, and a bunch of psychologists got arrested, because that's what happens when fascists take rule. Usually they go after the teachers and like science, like the sciences and teaching, except for war sciences. War sciences like get, amped up and get funding and stuff, but they tend to like jail anybody who's gonna do anything for the humanities. The humanities are usually the first to go. But anyhow, apparently Jung, and this is like a controversial thing, but apparently when all the psychologists got arrested or had to move out of Germany to like live and not get murdered, Jung took the position of being the head of psychology for Germany. And his statement was like, well, I'm doing it to like keep the science alive because I'd hate for the science to die with all this. And it's like, no, dude, like you saw an open position and you sided with the devil. So keep that in mind with Young too. Dylan said people into us versus them, and you can only be this thing and be put in a box. Yeah, I feel like that's one of the things that can be dangerous even with Jungian stuff is like, it's very much like, well, you're an extrovert, so therefore this is how you are. And it's like people rarely, even on the Myers-Briggs, I think most modern analysis is that like it's not perfectly accurate because like people always have a little of everything. It's kind of like philosophy where everyone has a bit of a nihilist in them. Like, and hardly anyone I know is a pure nihilist, but almost every belief system has like an element of nihilism in it. But if you're ever in a discussion with somebody who's very like black and white in their thinking, they'll be like, you're a nihilist and you think this. And you're like, they start describing, like, again, you ticked off the box nihilist and it gets them through a logic tree that they've already memorized. Because this is a bizarre thing, but there's a whole like, I remember, I did debate when I was in high school and things like debate and mock trial and stuff like that. And one of my strengths was I have a horrible memory. And that's not a strength, but what it would do is like quite often one of my strengths was, when we were doing like mock trial and stuff, like I would go out of the box with defenses and stuff like, and we were on the defense team. So like, generally I was running defense, like when I was doing, court arguments and stuff. And I always got pretty high ratings for like creativity in my arguments and stuff because, they'd prep for like weeks, and have like canned responses. Like the lawyer will say this, and then I would come in and just say something way different. Oh, I missed the things. Dylan said, I roll my eyes when people say they don't like labels. I think you're being pretentious. We as humans are built to have labels to tell things apart. It's only dangerous when we divide. Okay, I get what you're saying. But I think people are trying to fit everyone really neatly into a definition. Can be really dangerous too. So it's like, because again, it's weird when you read those like, it goes like this for everything. It's like, if you study like psychology or you look at like mental illnesses and stuff like that, it's like usually there's this kind of canned response of like, this is exactly what you'll be like. Even with stuff about autism, where it'll be like, this is autism, this is what it looks like. And it's like, no, it's kind of, luckily, people are a little smarter about it now and being like, okay, recognizing that a lot of these things are like a spectrum. So there's some common threads that allow us to label it, but the label itself, like, doesn't mean you should go to like some logic tree that's like, you're saying you're this, therefore, and like, just go through your logic tree of lists. That can be really frustrating if you're in conversation with somebody and you're really just trying to actually converse with them and not argue. Because people default to these like kind of pre-programmed, pre-memorized logic trees of arguments against something before they've even heard the person they're talking to kind of talk about it. So that's always like really frustrating to me, where people will be like, oh, well, you believe this, therefore. I remember a while ago, oh my gosh, this was a long time ago, like a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago. I was talking a little more about you know, like all the things you're not supposed to talk about, like religion and politics and stuff like that. And I remember having an art hangout where somebody from outside of our community kind of joined us. And just from what I was saying, just was like, well, you're an atheist and you think this. And like, it was just the most bizarre thing because it was like, wait a minute. No, I never, no, like way off mark. But I was saying things, a few things that they just instantly associated with atheism, without even bothering to ask me like, hey, are you an atheist? Because I'm not. But you know, but it was interesting to me that they just made that assumption. They're like, well, you talk this way, therefore you must be an atheist. And it's like, it's a bizarre thing that we're in a world where, you know, and it makes me wonder about those people, like the kind of person who's going to be like, well, you're this, so therefore you think this. That kind of like jumping to conclusions thing is a really bizarre thing to me. And it makes me wonder about the people who do it. Like if they're like, well, you think this, therefore you must, like ascribing thoughts and ideas to someone who you haven't even talked to or bothered to ask like what their thoughts and ideas are is a really weird thing. And I think I might have fallen prey to this a little bit when I was younger too. And I might still today. But it's just funny to me when people make assumptions based on like two words you say. They're like, therefore you must. And usually their therefore you must is like so off mark and so off base, you know. Dylan said that's one of the issues with the alternative community. When they find out if you listen to any other genre of music, you're not a real alt person. I am alt since I listen to music, but I am also pop, classic rock, X, Y, and Z. I'm a complex human being, and I'm allowed to be a complex human being. Yeah, and I think there's a semblance of youth to it because it's like, you know, I think generally when you're younger, it's like, no, you're either straight edge or you die. Like, you know, it's like this, even actually it's funny. There's a lot of, conversations Ian Mackay's had about that, where he started this movement mainly because it was like in the local DC area. You know, he was in a band that had minors in it. Like they were teenagers and they wanted to be able to play venues like bar venues. And they were trying to think of a way to get people in where it was like all ages shows. And so they made a deal with the bars at the shows. Like, hey, what if we put like an X on the hands of like people who don't drink? Like, will you let them into the show then? And then you'll know not to serve them because we'll write them in like Sharpie, like, you know, permanent marker kind of thing. And they'll wear them proudly so that, like, you know, you don't have to worry about them, like these underage kids, like drinking. And so they do that. And then they kind of make this movement based on that called straight edge. And then out of nowhere, like it just gets co-opted and suddenly policed. And like, like people find out that, like, you know, a couple members of Fugazi or something later on, you know, 10 years later, you know, when they're not teenagers, like drink beer. And Ian Mackay still doesn't do any drugs or drink or anything, but he was never really like trying to say like, this is how you have to live. Like, and people would, you know, just freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, they're sellouts. They're lying. And it's like, no, they were teenagers who wanted teenagers to go to shows. And so they came up with this idea of like, wouldn't it be cool if like we could make it a cool thing for like people in the punk scene who don't want to do drugs to have like an option, you know? But anyhow, that's one of those scenes where the label took over and it just became like ridiculous. Because people really want things to be really black and white. really like lacking nuance. But I can also understand that, right? Because like there can be frustration with nuance. Like to me, nuance can also be an escape from accountability. So there definitely are times where you got to like pick where you're planting your flag, right? You know what I mean? Um, like I feel like sometimes people will use the term nuance as like an escape from accountability for taking a side or picking where they stand. But there's also times where like where you stand isn't super clear, and like there really isn't like a clear ground to like pitch a tent at, you know. Um and so it's like I don't know. I find it really interesting. I don't know if you guys are finding this interesting. This is the stuff I think about at like 12:30 while I'm working on comics. But it's interesting. Dylan says they think that they're different than society, yet it's a micro expression of the macro of humanity's behavior. Yeah, and I think the thing to kind of keep in mind is that people are complicated, and you know, if you're classifying people for like scientific purposes, that makes sense, you know. Like for instance, if you're trying to find out like what age range is affected by like a drug or something like that in a you know double blind test, then classifying people is probably a good idea, right? Just for data. But the biggest mistake, I think, well, not the biggest, but one of the biggest mistakes of modern society is like the idea of breaking people down into data. And I think unfortunately this leads to a lot of like demonization of people too. Like I've seen this definitely happen, you know, in politics where it's like, you know, a politician will make somebody an enemy and then it's like, these are the bad guys. And don't get me wrong, like especially in the US, there are some pretty clear bad guys. They're doing some pretty bad things. But quite often how they get people, you know, and you can see this in history too, how people will get other people to be horrible to each other is just to kind of dehumanize those people by like basically making them monsters. So it's like, okay, these people though aren't people, right? So they're deserving of our wrath and our fury, you know. So I think like I don't know. Anyhow, I'm rambling, but I think the idea of like breaking people down into data points. When I was an art director, one of the hardest things to hear, you know, like sales or like the CEO talk about was like human capital. Like the idea. This is a term that people use in business, and it's insane to me. It's like, how is the human capital? That's just a disgusting phrase that should never be uttered. And for some reason in business rooms, it's like completely acceptable to say human capital, talk about productivity. And it's like, you're almost talking about people like they're AIs. Which makes a lot of sense. Is like, why are our societies okay with adopting AI? And don't get me wrong, it's everywhere. You know, it's in education too. It's like they're going to study numbers and stats and tests and test results and stuff like that. You kind of have to, if you're going to do analysis, you kind of have to break people down into segments and you know, study behaviors in a broad sense, because it's like it's not like in a study, or if you're studying statistics, you're going to get into like the crazy nuance of everything. Like you can't write everything down, you know? So you got to kind of categorize and group in little chunks, but it's like the idea of taking the complexity of a human being and just boiling it down to like, what's their raw, like value, you know, like as if human life is like, you know, a number on a spreadsheet or a dot in a data point, you know, or a dot on a an Excel chart, you know. I don't know. There's a give and take to it, but I feel like there's a cynicism to that pervades a lot of society right now, where you know, we're used to like kind of otherizing people and making them like this big scary bad guy, you know. Otherizing employees, right? Because if it's just human capital, then, you know, if you're doing savings and you have to do layoffs, it doesn't feel as personal. Or the phrase, it's not personal, it's business. Like all of these things that, you know, it's just like, ugh. It's gross. Business is personal. People are personal. Jobs are personal, you know. Sometimes you got to be a little cold-hearted, I guess, in a capitalist system, but maybe that's not a good thing, you know. I feel like, you know what's wild is like, wasn't this already addressed? Like, have you guys seen The Christmas Story? Like, A Christmas Story is a great book. The Dickens story, where Scrooge is like, you know, haunted by like ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. I feel like people just forget what that book was about. Like, or maybe it's just that we live in cycles and we repeat. But it's like this beloved book, you know, and I think people tend to think it's got like a moral to it, right? Where it's like, don't be like a selfish jerk, you know. But then you know, along comes Ayn Rand, who's like, actually, Scrooge was awesome. Like, I don't know, like actually Scrooge, and it's funny because in that book, Scrooge uses like a lot of the like Ayn Randian like futurist, is it future? I can't even remember what her philosophy is called. I feel like it was futurism, something like that, isn't it? I can't remember. Do you remember, Dylan, Ayn Rand's philosophy, or do you happen to have a Google search near you? Anyhow, ads can't pin me down on what to show me. I am undefinable by an algorithm. Unfortunately, I'm very definable by an algorithm. My algorithm has me pretty figured out. I love guitars, and like, if you want to make me part with my hard-earned cash, show me a beautiful guitar. That's, I think the internet's figured me out on that one. That's my mad consumerism, is I get really into guitar. Like, I really like guitars. But yeah, like, so even in like A Christmas Story or whatever, I was watching this, like, I don't know, my wife watches the Muppet Christmas Carol all the time because it's bomb and she thinks it's amazing, and I agree with her. It's great. The Muppet Christmas Carol is fantastic. It's a wonderful piece of work. But it is interesting because you look at Scrooge, he's got all the justifications for like why he's, you know, actually a net positive for society, and like it goes through all the arguments, all the Ayn Randian things, actually, by being selfish and frugal, right? Like, I'm continuing businesses and providing employment for people. This is a positive, you know, like my selfishness is actually helping people. He goes through all that, and it's like, no, there's no excuse for your lack of humanity. You know, it's basically the gist of like what the ghosts are telling him. Like, you gotta be real. You gotta care about people. If you employ people, you should care if they're starving, you know, like that might actually be a good thing, you know. You know, it's like, it's possible to kind of do both, right? Like to possibly be wealthy and also not be a jerk, you know. That was the gist of it. But then along comes Ayn Rand. You know, it's like the well actually guy, you know, who's just like, well, actually, you know, do we have to really be nice? Because if everybody's nice, then like everything will fall apart because, you know, they're all Atlas and carrying the whole world on their shoulders. You know? Anyhow, yeah, it's wild. Elizabeth said, evening, Josh and chat. Good evening, Elizabeth. We're working on comics. Hopefully you guys are working on something creative. I always encourage people to work on something creative. But yeah, I was just musing about I don't know where I was going actually. I think I was going on a rant about how weird our society is, that we'll kind of be on the right path. We'll feel like, okay, everybody's kind of cool with the Christmas Carol, right? Most people like that story, right? We're all kind of on the same board here, right? Uncle Scrooge, kind of tragic figure who had lost touch with, you know, his humanity and basically become a miser, which was always a negative. And then you have like some kind of rebranding effort go through. And suddenly everybody's like, actually, no, Scrooge is the best. Like, Scrooge is amazing. Why did he switch? Oh, come on. Here, select inverse. But it feels like there's like truisms that like people know in their hearts like that like certain things are just wrong. And then they become the well actually guy. You know, it's you see this all the time, right? Somebody will be like, it's really wrong to like treat other people different because of you know, because of where they're from or something. And like, that's a pretty reasonable statement, right? Like, where you probably shouldn't treat people differently. Like, judge people by who they are, right? Not by like what they look like, right? Like, judge them by like how they behave, right? That's a pretty standard kind of truism, right? And then it's like, boom, there's the well actually guy. Well, actually, statistically, it's like that guy is just ruining our world. Like, the well actually guy. Well, actually, I know it sounds horrible, but like, they should just stop at, I don't know. I feel like if if you're watching A Christmas Story and you're like, hey, you know what? Actually, Scrooge was cool. These ghosts, wrong. Like, I'm just saying, if you're like, you know, hey, Uncle Scrooge was a genius. Like, he was a great guy. And then like all these ghosts, like, you know, Ghost of Christmas Past, all of them, they're wrong. Because without Uncle Scrooge, if Uncle Scrooge had if Scrooge had shrugged, just imagine, guys. Actually, I wonder if there's a book already. That would be a good book. You could do a version of Atlas Shrugged called Scrooge Shrugged. So you have the Ghost of Christmas Past, whichever ghost comes first. I always forget. But you have whichever ghost visits Scrooge first, right? He appears and then another ghost appears and they're like, actually, if Scrooge shrugs, all of this area will fall apart. The whole economic system will fall apart. His money in the bank that's funding different businesses will shrink. And it will literally, by being selfish, Scrooge is actually helping everyone. Like, oh, objectivist. Thank you. Yeah. Dylan said sometimes the devil's advocate is necessary and sometimes it's not. And I am a big devil's advocate. Like, I tend to try to argue or understand the steel man for other people. Sometimes the steel man's just really weak. Like, I've never really heard a good steel man of objectivism that can get around with, I mean, just the pure truth of objectivism is, it's really, I don't know. It was really appealing when I was in like junior high, you know, where I thought about things in black and white. But when I think about it more as an adult, it's just kind of boiled down like somebody's trying to justify being a jerk. You know? Elizabeth said, let's ask Charles Dickens. No, just the other thing is like, man, I tried to watch. There was like a there was an Ayn Rand. I've mentioned this before, but for some reason, Dylan said, I love being the devil's advocate, and I know some people don't like that, but let me be the devil's advocate for the devil's advocate. Yeah. But the actually guy, like the guy who basically starts, like when someone's saying something and they're starting with, not to sound like a jerk, but like 9 times out of 10, they probably just shouldn't say the thing they're saying, you know, or they're like, I know this will sound, you know, the second it starts there, I don't know, sometimes like it's like those people know, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like objectivists know it too, where they're like, I know it sounds selfish, but actually being selfish is actually being selfless, and being selfless is actually being selfish. And we're just going to flip definitions because it's really cool to hoard. And we're what causes the world to turn. And it's like, I don't know. No, I think you were right at the beginning where you said that sounds really selfish, because it is. Anti-devil's advocates hate seeing me coming. I love it. But anyhow, so I watched these movies on Netflix a couple years back because I thought they'd be funny, and I was right. If you want to see something hilarious, watch the movie version of Atlas Shrugged, and actually I tried to read that a couple years back, because I remember when I think I was in 7th grade, and I read Ayn Rand, and for like a week I was like, yeah, she's right, this is true. And then I thought about it for like another week, and then I think I hit the 8th grade, and I was like, it's kind of stupid. Like, it's kind of poorly argued. But man, I tried to reread like, it was The Fountainhead that I tried to reread recently, like a couple years back, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible writing. Like, it's so bad. One of the things that's awful about it is like, you know, like it's kind of like the most moralistic writing I've ever read in my life, where it's like the characters speak the philosophy, where they're just like, yes, I know I should have a conscience, but conscience will actually cause me to fail. And if I fail, then the whole world fails too. So I have no time for conscience. And you're like, wait, what? Like, who talks like that? Like, all the characters and like characters will talk. I can't remember. Is this the Fountainhead? Now I'm getting them all confused, but it's the one with like the train dude, like the guy who runs, like, he's like the steel. I think he has like a steel plant or something named after him. And like all of his dialogue is pretty much like, yes, it is me. I am the innovator. Like, it's so bad. And then all the characters, all the side characters in it are just a service to the main character. So like, they'll be like, you must be selfish to basically help our society because you, sir, your steel is... It's like, nobody talks like that. Nobody talked like that back then. She was a bad writer. She was a bad philosopher. She couldn't cut it in philosophy. And so she basically wrote these really terrible books and kind of skidded in this like weird territory of being a writer, but also being a philosopher, but like not really holding a candle in philosophy, because she couldn't justify her philosophy. So she was like, I'm a fiction writer / philosopher. And then somebody would be like, yeah, your philosophy has some holes in it. Well, psst, I mean, I'm a fiction writer. And it's like, well, your fiction has some holes in it. No, I'm a philosopher. Like, I don't know. Elizabeth said word salad started really, really early. Am I word salading? I don't know. But yeah, they're pretty rough books is all I'm saying. They're rough books. They're roughly written. But I am rambly today, so I might be word salading. I don't know. But it's fascinating. Dylan said, I view it as a potential enlightening moment for the person because everything about progress was at one point needing an enlightenment on its purpose to be used. Enlightening moment. Oh, Elizabeth said at least she didn't include aliens. Yeah. But I mean, it's a little cultish, like, but I think at the end of the day, like, I think people know it. It's like, you know, like okay, here's an argument. I'm going to try to steelman it, but I'm going to steelman it with a different argument. Okay, there is an argument that bullies did a lot of good, and I've heard this argument a lot. You know, you hear it a lot of people of my generation, and there's some truth to it. Now, the argument for bullies, right, is that bullies were like the curators of like what is socially okay and what is socially taboo and unacceptable. And by being bullied, you basically learn how to function in a society, right? So when you get bullied, basically, it's like a way to get trained to be funny or to be skilled or to be talented or to be quiet, right? It's like, it's kind of like a an evolutionary, I'm devil's advocating right now. This is not what I believe. It's an evolutionary force or pressure, like to evolve socially so that you as a person can basically go on, succeed, learn how to function in society, learn how to achieve a mate, and basically, you know, be fruitful and multiply, basically. That's the rough gist of it. And there's some slight truth to that, right? Like it, some people can be a little too fragile and might need a little bit, like, I don't know, like some people might benefit from a fist fight. But at the same time, like, you know, growing up at a time where, you know, bullying was much more tolerated, especially in like PE classes, right? There was just a lot of bad behavior just being accepted by people and putting kids through undue pressures. And so like the idea of an anti-bullying stance in a school, I think, is a really beneficial thing because bullies suck and quite often are just like pathetic people who, or not necessarily pathetic, but like hurt people that are hurting people, right? And so I think to an extent, did we overcorrect? Maybe, but we can't just ignore the fact that like it's just not cool to bully people. Like it's kind of a bad thing to like have to resort to force to prove your point. That's just not a good thing in society in general. Probably not a good place to be. You know, we don't have to be in the Hunger Games. We just don't. Like it, and again, you know, the argument for it kind of assumes a world where everything is dog eat dog and cutthroat and it's a zero-sum game. And if you look at life from that perspective, if everything's a zero-sum game, then like bullying probably would make sense, right? In a zero-sum game world. But the nice thing is, you know, by kind of creating conditions where bullying isn't as accepted, you have other voices thrive and people being able to develop in a safe environment, and that actually leads to more innovation, more voices, better things. So like the reason I'm bringing up the bullying thing, the reason I'm bringing that up is it's the same kind of false logic that Ayn Rand presents, right? Where she goes, actually, it's good to be selfish, right? It's the same thing as like the bullying argument, where it's like, well, actually, it's really good to be selfish, because this is her argument. Because by being selfish, you're actually like carrying the like the people who are selfish are the people who make the world work, who innovate, who do all these great things. And it's like, again, there's like a slight nugget of truth in there, but she takes the tiny bit of truth and it explodes it to justify like the worst behavior. Kind of like, you know, some social pressure is probably good for people, right? But straight out, just like violent, horrible bullying, probably not so much, right? Kind of same thing. There are times in life where being selfish actually probably would be beneficial. And this is just like, you know, this is where she capitalizes on the truism to build a false kind of dilemma, which is like, okay, if your family's starving, right, and somebody asks you for food, the moral decision might actually be to feed your family, right? That might actually be the moral decision. Might not be the easiest, but that might be the moral decision. Then she builds on that truism to kind of go, therefore, being selfish is the truly selfless thing. Like, because by being selfish, you're saving resources for yourself to be able to innovate. This is like the Ayn Randian idea, the objectivist idea. So actually you're helping the world, like by being selfish and, you know, saving your money, you're basically growing that income, and that's going to grow businesses, and that'll trickle down. It's like, it's old school trickle down theory. It's like Reagan before Reagan. But the problem is it's ignoring the fact that there's a lot of people titans of industry who've created like shanty towns and horrible living conditions for people. And it did not lead to great innovation. It actually led to some pretty terrible monopolistic controls over what kind of innovations could happen. And it just kind of ignores any of the counter argument to selfishness. And again, it assumes a world of a zero-sum game. And so, like, to me, that's where it all kind of collapses, is the second you just stop agreeing with the assumption of this world, which isn't the world we live in, you start realizing that the flaws in objectivism, because objectivism fails if you realize our world is not a zero-sum game, that like a rising tide can raise all ships, that, you know, actually by having a mindset that things are zero-sum, you're creating a zero-sum environment. And that's a dangerous, horrible environment. Yeah, Dylan said, I think bullying isn't necessary, but I think critiquing might be the healthier alternative. And he said, I'm not 100% sure about that theory. Yeah, I think here's the thing. Like, again, there's some truth to, if you raise people in a soft enough environment where they're not used to hearing, like, you know, basically, if you raise people in a soft enough environment where they're never going to hear when they're wrong, right? Like, that's a dangerous environment, and that could lead to some serious delusion. You know, so you need to have people who are able to get into healthy conflict, right? Get into healthy debate, rationalize and defend ideas, be able to kind of acknowledge and reason their way through being wrong or making a misstep. And so those are really positive things. the mistake would be to associate those with therefore we need bullying. Like that would be the logical mistake, right? Because again, maybe some of those beneficial things could happen in different ways than allowing, kids to basically like ruin other kids' lives. Like, and it's kind of a similar thing where like innovation's good. Like it is good to probably have a society where people get rewarded for hard work and possibly rewarded more for the more hard work they put in. That's not necessarily wrong, but to just therefore leapfrog from that to going, therefore be selfish is like, that's just like, that's insane. Like that's a wild leap. But again, like when I read Rand, and again, if you're a big Ayn Rand fan, I'd love to, or Ayn Rand fan, I'd love to hear your take on it. But I have never seen, I think the problem with her that I see is it just makes these assumptions and expects you to go along with it. And they're not like regular rational assumptions. Like an assumption we all need to go along with if we're going to have a rational conversation would be that you can have a rational conversation, right? Because then otherwise you end up in the nihilist, the nihilism trap, right? The nihilism trap's like basically, you learn about this in like early philosophy, right? Where it's like, if you're going to go pure nihilist, right? Where we're going to have a conversation and eventually just devolve into, does anything mean anything? And what is the point of anything? Then there's really, you're kind of negating the purpose of a constructive conversation, right? So you have to kind of agree that, that you exist, right? And maybe we can start there, right? Maybe we can start at, I think, therefore I am. Because otherwise, we could end up in this whole loophole of like, well, I mean, are you even real? Are words even real? And it just becomes a nonsensical kind of pointless conversation. So there are assumptions you have to kind of start with and agree on in order to have like a good conversation. But the assumptions that Ayn Rand just expects you to agree with in her work is just like, it's like absurd, where it's like there's these truths that she'll like talk about, and then she'll go, therefore you should jump off a cliff. And you're like, wait, whoa, what? It's like that kind of a leap. And I don't like that. I feel like that's real sloppy logic. And it reminds me of like when I've talked to people who are like ANCAPs. Like ANCAPs remind me of that a lot. Where they're like, if we just went to the gold standard, I mean, look at government, right? Look at all the coercion. Look at all the coercion. This is like the big ANCAP thing. ANCAPs like to talk about coercion. They're obsessed with that word coercion. And then you just bring up one thing where you're like, okay, so because anarcho-capitalists tend to be all about property rights, though. Like that's the one thing, right? Let people have their property. So then you're like, okay, what happens if somebody steps on your property? And you're like, well, I mean, you defend your property with a gun. And you're like, wait, isn't that coercion? Isn't coming at somebody with violence coercion? Wouldn't somebody starving be coercive? Like, if you're starving, you're kind of coerced into working. Like, actually, it's kind of weird, but we live in a world that like is not like free of coercion. So you kind of can't escape coercion. But, again, a lot of ANCAPs just want you to go along with it. It's like, yeah, the government's coercive and they're coercing money from you. And don't you want to live in a system that's not full of coercion? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess, but like, what system's that? Because it's definitely not the one you're describing. Like, you know what I mean? But they want you to just go along with it. It's like, okay, yeah, I agree. These things are all messed up. Which, by the way, a lot of ANCAP criticisms of government, of what's wrong with the world, totally valid. But the problem is, it's like, okay, you're describing a problem and then you're saying a thing that doesn't solve the problem is the solution. And it's like, but it doesn't change it. Like, You're actually just saying, let's make it worse. And that doesn't, like, I'm not going to go along with your crazy logic tree there, because you skipped a mile ahead, and I'm supposed to agree with it. Dylan said, I find a bit more value in critiquing my side of the political aisle because everyone else is critiquing the opposite side. Dylan said, NCAPs. How do you spell that? No, ANCAPs, like anarcho-capitalists. That's a whole thing. Like, hardcore libertarians usually describe themselves as ANCAPs, like anarcho-capitalists. And they're very anti-coercion. But I find that, like, a lot of hardcore anarcho-capitalists usually have that flaw. So they'll bring up really valid things, like where they're like, why do we even value the dollar? The dollar is just a thing. It's just a piece of paper. It's paper that the government prints, and it doesn't have an actual value. And they're like, a lot of them are very big on the gold standard, where it's like, therefore we should go back to gold, or they tend to be big on going back to a monetary resource that has limits, right? But then that collapses, right? Because then you'll talk about, well, okay, do you just believe me, I have relatives who are ANCAP, so I've had these conversations a million times. So you'll be like, okay, so, oh, he said you missed part 1 of the part 2. I think bullying isn't, no, I think I already got the bullying part. Where's 1? I don't see 1. Oh, he said, I mean, most inventions like phones, photography, cars, printing presses had some negative pushback due to them being new, but it was the devil's advocate that made that possible. For said invention to become popular, that goes with ideology of beliefs like ways should be able to marry, etc. Okay, I don't follow. I'm sorry, Dylan. But yeah, so anyhow, like a lot of them will talk about, like the need to go back to like the gold standard and stuff, and that collapses the second you just ask them, well, like, okay, so if I buy a house, do I lug like a bag of gold with me, like a giant vat of gold? And they're like, no, you'd give it like a bank note, like a note from your local bank. And you're like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, like you'll have, there'll be banks, and they'll be, they'll have good reputations, and like, they'll just be like storage places for your gold. And then they can write a note saying, hey, so-and-so has so much gold in the bank. And you're like, wait a minute. So, but like, what if I'm like like, again, this is conversations I've had with actual ANCAPs where I'm like, okay, so like, let's say I'm like a bank that, I build a reputation, and then I hire somebody who's like, hey, we're just writing these notes. I'm gonna like forge one of these notes and like make it look like it's from the bank, because I work here, so I can kind of check it out. And then I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna buy stuff with that bank note, and then I'm gonna flee town, and they're like, no, you wouldn't be able to get away with that because, then you could sue them and take them to court. And I'm like, wait, you could sue them and take them to court, like, but how would you prove that it's not a real note? And then they're like, oh, well, we'd have like a security force that's like a private security force that like monitors it. And it basically what they end up doing is just recreating the Fed. Like, they end up recreating the Fed. Anyhow, it's just wild. Elizabeth said, Galileo, Figaro. So anyhow, my whole point is just like, be careful of people who get you. It's a sales tactic, right? It's like get you to say yes on one thing and then jump a mile, right? Like a salesperson who's like, would you say you really like the color orange or something? And you're like, yeah, I like orange. And then they're like, therefore, you're going to buy this orange car. And you're like, whoa, wait, what? That's what I'm saying. Don't don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because maybe you agree with like 2 or 3 things. Because that's the funnel. That's the funnel, the logic funnel, you know? Or the like, you know, some people are mean, right? And you're like, yeah, sometimes some people are mean. I'll agree with that. And it's like, therefore, everyone should die. And you're like, wait, what? I feel like Ayn Rand does that a lot, where it's like these leaps of logic, and she didn't bother to take the steps to get there. She just wants you to assume that everything she's saying is just fully coherent because there's 2 things that are true at the beginning of her logic thread, you know. She puts one leg under the table and then, you know, where, you know, and you need 4 legs of support, but she just gives you one and goes, therefore the table's standing. And I don't know. I'm skeptical of any of that kind of thinking. Where like, you know, it's true that the government's coercive. You're like, yeah, okay. Therefore, we need to get rid of the government. And you're like, okay, cool. What's your solution? Free markets. And it's like, wait, but haven't markets been bad in the past? That's because of government. Wait, this isn't really... Yeah, anyhow. Dylan said, I'll look in... he said, same way one. Oh, man, Dylan, I'm having trouble. There's an asterisk. This is looking like a Marvel comic from the 90s where there's like 500 crossovers and you're having to follow an asterisk, and then it's like... You go to the asterisk and it says see issue 257 of the Incredible Hulk, and you're like, but I'm following Spider-Man right now. I haven't read that. I don't want to buy that extra book just to be able to follow the comic I'm collecting. Dylan said, okay, never mind. No, I don't mind. I didn't know what the one is. Oh, same one. Oh, okay, I get what you're saying. You were correcting. Okay. I'm also sleepy. It's like 1:20 in the morning. I am planning on trying to go till 2. We'll see if I can finish, because I do have to work in the morning. We might have to call it at like 2. It'd be cool though if I could finish this. But I also have to survive tomorrow. Yeah, I used to when I was younger, I just didn't think about this kind of thing, you know, where like here's a weird leap argument that I've since kind of changed my mind on, right? Where people would be like, murder is bad, and you're like, yeah, and it's like, therefore we should kill people who murder, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Then I started like thinking about that just more logically later on, and I'm like, wait, that seems that seems kind of wrong. Wait, what? Like, I don't know if that's the right answer there, because it seems like kind of a problem, right? Like for me now, I'm kind of I again, I'm empathetic to people wanting things like the death penalty, but I'm kind of more I think being morally consistent with it might be kind of like, yeah, let's just not kill people. Like, let's just not do that. And maybe there can be punishments or whatever, but it seems like, yeah, like if ending a life is bad, then I don't know if like ending a life would be the solution to ending life. I get the eye for an eye kind of old school way of thinking about it, but as I get older, the more I'm like, maybe that's not the most, you know, you got me at one point. I kind of agree with the first part, but I don't know if the thread got tied fully there. You know what I mean? To take that giant leap where it's like, wait a minute, but it's, yeah. So anyhow, I don't know if any of that makes any sense, but it's just, I've gotten more skeptical of those giant leaps that, you know, people will kind of sell you on a short statement. comics are, you know what? I should try to sell things that way. Be like, guys, comics are cool. Therefore, you should buy 2 stories in Jacob's apartment. That's right. You like comics? Yes. Buy Jacob's apartment. Elizabeth said, I'm always worried it were to be back in the old days and evidence was wrong. I don't understand that. It were to be. I don't follow. I guess I can extrapolate, like, I definitely worry about, I definitely worry about people like kind of losing the ability to like decipher what evidence is real and what is not. Elizabeth said, my old time language. But I think one of the best things in the world is reason, you know? And so I think reasoning things out is a good thing. Like, I think being skeptical and reasoning things out, and just kind of thinking about them for a bit, you know, where it's like, you know, but like reasoning them beyond just like step 1, therefore step 10, you know, like it is possible for somebody you completely disagree with to have like 10% of what they say be true, you know. Again, somebody could say, you know, a truth, but you don't have to like bite the entire apple, you know. I don't know if that makes sense. There are some scenarios where you kind of do, like in logic, I guess, right? You know, like if you agree with the idea of like a law of causation, then, you know, you kind of do need causal links. Like if you think there's a true law of causation, then there have to be causes for everything, right? So there's some like scientific truths that like, you know, are kind of wholesale across the board. And so if you kind of accept a law like that's black and white, then you definitely have to kind of abide by that law to logically be coherent or consistent. But sometimes people will make things like a law that's black and white that really isn't, and they try to kind of sell you on it being black and white, so that they can sell you a product or a bad idea. I'm getting so rambly and philosophical. This is definitely 1:30 in the morning, Kemble time. Time for the Kemble. Dylan said, my point that I find more value in critiquing the left, since both aisles critique the opposite side. I'm critiquing both sides, and the left think I'm bullying them for critiquing the left. Well, I personally will not be doing much of that right now, because I will critique my own for sure, right? Because it's more offensive. It's kind of like if you're really into punk rock and somebody claiming to be punk is like running around being a douchebag, and you're like, that's not really what this thing's about. I understand, like you kind of want to keep your tribe in line. I don't know if that makes sense. I think that's kind of what you're saying. But I would say in scenarios like right now, I don't see, I used to agree with you on that, but the way our country's going right now, I don't see a point in critiquing the left, to be frank. Because it's just like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Okay. I have an analogy. It's Roman times, and we're in a Colosseum right now. And on one hand, you have somebody in the Colosseum who's a big guy who's punching people, and you're focusing on that guy who's like walking around punching people in the Colosseum when they've just let lions into the Colosseum. Right now, I'm going to worry about the lions, and then we'll worry about that guy later. Does that make sense? That's kind of where I feel like we're at. Is that a good analogy? So right now, I don't see value in critiquing the dude when we have just like lions ransacking the entire place. So right now, I feel like it's more of, personally, I think it's more of a batten the hatches and fight kind of time, because there's no both sidesing right now. That's my own opinion. I think having an objective view and hearing other people's opinions is all well and good. But, if Hannibal Lecter is on the loose, us having civil discussions with Hannibal and then other people who aren't, killing people, I feel like I want to deal with Hannibal first, and then we can get back to civil discussions. Does that make sense? Like when there's a death cult, when there's a literal death cult, I don't know if like I want to have civil discussions with the death cult. Like I'd rather kind of deal with the death cult, and then we can go back to civil discussions. Yeah, Dylan was saying we need more Democrats to take action against MAGA. I'll critique the ways it might do said actions. And says, I'm concerned about the potential of the oppressed becoming the oppressor. I mean, I'll be concerned about that when we're in that space. But right now, we're far beyond that even needing to be a concern, in my opinion. Because, like, again, I think we're kind of on the brink of losing our whole government, like our whole system of the checks and balances are failing. So I right now, I don't know. I got to speak softly on that kind of topic, but yeah. Personally, I think it's good to know where people are coming from and accept that people are different and people have different opinions, but we're in pretty dark territories right now. Elizabeth said, I'm going to get dinner. Dinner? Elizabeth, what time is it where you live? That's nuts. We must be on like opposite sides of the globe or something. Elizabeth, are you in a different state or country than the US? I would imagine so. So if you're doing dinner, that's a pretty big time difference. But enjoy your dinner. I was just curious. I feel like we might have talked about this before, or maybe I'm forgetting. But I do agree with you in this sense, Dylan, where I think sometimes people demonize other people without bothering to steelman or learn what those people actually believe. But I also think there is a time and place for, once you find out what people actually believe them. I don't know if that makes sense. Like when you take the time to find out what people actually believe, if if a lot of those people want like a religious dictatorship, then maybe, there might be a point where conversing isn't a positive and action is kind of required. Trying to think of a good example. When I lived in Long Beach, back then, I mean, this is years ago. This is back when I used to smoke cigarettes, which is a terrible habit, and no one should ever do that. And I don't judge it because I used to do it, and it was a really dumb habit. But anyhow, so one of the nice things about that habit that I miss sometimes, let's see, what did I include on this layer that I should have done on a different layer? Okay, I see what I did. One of the positives of that, even though that it's a terrible habit, is you get in conversations with random people. So I had this neighbor who seemed like a nice lady, and she was a smoker too. And so like anytime I'd be outside, like having a smoke, we'd get in these conversations about like the neighborhood and the weather and like different interests and stuff like that. And she seemed like just a sweet, nice lady. And then one time, because she felt comfortable around me, she opened up and basically just talked really badly about all Asian people and said how frustrated and mad she was that there were Asian people moving to the neighborhood. And the second she opened that up, it wasn't like I can't wait to find out more about your viewpoint. It was, my family is Asian. Like half my family is Asian, and I don't want to hang out with this lady. I don't want to have a conversation with her. I don't want to feed that. I don't want to feed what she's saying. Like, I don't want to validate what she's saying. So I just told her, I was like, well, half my family's Asian, and I think what you just said is pretty horrible. And I never talked to her again. So I feel like that was an okay call, because I was like, okay, you showed me who you are. I kind of don't want to feed that. Like, I don't want to both sides this. Well, why does she feel that way? And maybe some people have more patience for that, but like for me, I wasn't really open to like dialogue at that point. I was just like, yeah, I think you're kind of just not really a person I want to talk to, especially because like that starts getting personal towards my family kind of thing. Does that make sense? So I was like, I feel like that's an example. I'm just using one example of a scenario where like both sidesing may not be the best route. Like, I didn't really feel like steel manning her position there. You know what I mean? That's just an example. Does that make sense? I don't know. Anyhow, I was just bringing that up as like an example of where I kind of feel like we're at with some of this stuff in the US, where there's like times where, I don't know, man, like if you met somebody who was in Jim Jones's cult, I don't know, is there a point where maybe dialogue's not fruitful? But then I can see your argument though, Dylan, like originally, because I think what you're getting at is like dialogue. Like even in the scenario of my neighbor, maybe if I had just kept talking to her, it would humanize, like she would get to know my family, and by getting to know my family, maybe become less racist, you know? So there is an argument for that. And I do think that's how a lot of racism and sexism like stops, is by people actually talking to people. Like I do think usually that kind of stuff brews in like in situations where people just aren't exposed to other people, and so that it's easier to kind of make somebody a monster or an other because you're just never exposed to them. And so you know, there could be an argument for what you're saying, Dylan, of like, you know, the more dialogue people have, the more they get exposed to ideas. Hopefully the right ideas win out, right? So I get where you're coming from, Dylan. If I'm mischaracterizing where you're coming from, let me know. So I can see like an argument there, but I also think there are times where it's okay to kind of put your foot down and be like, yeah, this just this just isn't good. Like, and maybe there's a place for both, you know? But I also can understand, because I totally feel you on like what you were saying about kind of feeling like you can do better critiquing your own side. I definitely feel that way, you know, as a Christian. I find I tend to be more critical of Christians who are misrepresenting you know, what I think is, you know, what I think Christ was talking about, right? I feel like that there's like an extra layer to it because of the fact that I believe it. It's like extra offensive when somebody's like running around like using, you know, a thing that I believe to like abuse people or to mistreat people, you know? Yeah, Dylan was saying I would try to keep her around to have a friend who had a family friend who said he's only around her because she's part white, but she stayed around. He apologized and isn't racist anymore due to getting to know her. Oh. Yeah, I do think, I mean, change can happen, you know, and by, you know, that's like one of the big arguments for education too, right? Like the more kind of exposed to ideas and stuff people are, hopefully the good ideas win out. But it's also another reason why, like, you know, people have to like, we have to really start training people to be rational and use reason and spot fallacies. Like I think those are like really key things that that if people aren't taught how to do that, then like they're very vulnerable to like manipulation and bad ideas. And I feel like having open ideas and discourse is good, but like to an extent you need an informed public. Like even the founding fathers kind of the US kind of thought that, where it's like you really need an informed public to be able to have this whole thing work. Because if the public's not informed, I'm liking this, but I'm not liking this here. So I want this to get darker, back towards behind these figures. So that'll work better. Dylan said it stems from ignorance, so educating them by sticking around will hopefully be educated on said topic to change their mind. Yeah. And I think that's good for, you know, some. You know. Let's see here. Let's see. We're getting there. I think I'm going to have to call it on this panel because it's been like, it's getting closer to 2. But I'm happy with how the page is coming out. I'm a little bummed we're not going to get the whole page done, because I usually like to get an entire page done. And I don't think that last panel is going to take quite as long. But I do think we have to kind of call it. I will say there's a time change in California. So Artcasters, if you're in California, Artcasters will be happening at 7. If you're in Arizona, Artcasters won't be changing at all. But that'll be on Thursday. And it will be on my channel, I think, this week. And I believe it's a guest that Scott booked, which is pretty exciting. So I'm excited about that. But I will probably be live streaming again tomorrow. And probably pretty late. Kind of similar to the time I did today. I might do another live stream of music too if you guys enjoyed that. So let me know in the comments if you like the music stuff. Let me know in the comments whether, you guys are digging this. I'm just going to finish this specific panel because by the time I'm done with that, it's going to be about 2. Dylan said, as much as I would like to say everyone should stick around to help educate the person, but in reality, I think it's not possible for everyone to do so. I have a lot of patience for people with diverse ideas. And also a lot of empathy for people with bad ideas. Because I do think, sometimes bad ideas are just ingrained and, again, also just taught. And it's hard to break people of like cognitive bias. And so I do think being patient with people is good. But I also think there are some things that some ideas like, need to be called out. But also need to be able to be argued against. So I think there's a place for both. But I get what you're saying, Dylan. And like I said, well, I think we've mentioned this. We both like steel manning and devil's advocating. So even though I was mentioning my neighbor as an example of like sometimes dialogue is less helpful, I still can see a really solid argument for your take on it, Dylan. And I guess I almost admire it. I think I admire it. Let's see here. But there's also times like, I don't know. Have you seen The Life of Brian? It's great. The Life of Brian has this scene where, and it's kind of an example of like the opposite problem where, there's all these people basically getting together talking about how they should overthrow Rome and how the Messiah is basically like gonna lead this revolution. And they're like, we gotta just stop standing around and philosophizing and actually stand up against Rome and stuff. And then somebody comes in the room and goes, Rome captured the Messiah. They're going to crucify him. We got to do something. And they go, yes, but we need to talk about it first. And then they all start debating. Anyhow, it's like kind of a class. It's like a meme at this point, but it's in The Life of Brian. I think you can end up in danger of that too, where sometimes dialogue can be a little useless, so there's definitely times, I think sometimes for action, but I kind of vibe with what you're saying, Dylan. I think that's a good, you sound like you've got a really good heart, which is cool. Let's see here. Actually, that same scene has a criticism of ANCAPs. um, what was it? In that scene, there's a part where they're talking about overthrowing Rome, and then they're like, "What would that society look like?" And they basically start rebuilding Rome, like as they're talking about overthrowing it. They're like, "Yeah, and it would have like a sewer system." And they're like, "Kind of like our sewer system," and they're like, "Yeah," and they're like, "And then we'd have representatives," and it's like, "Oh, like the representatives they have for us," and it's like, "Yeah," and like, and you know, it's just a funny scene. Okay. Monty Python, man. They addressed everything. Dylan said, I haven't seen that movie before. It's a worthwhile one. It's very funny. It's very irreverent though. It's very irreverent. So if you're, offended by like heresy or something, you probably shouldn't watch it. But it's very funny. Very funny. All right. We have Dylan said, what's the name again? It's called The Life of Brian. It's a Monty Python, one of their movies. And it was very controversial when it came out. I think when it came out, there's a famous there's a famous panel where they had John Cleese and Michael Palin on this like British TV show. You can probably find it on YouTube, but it's like a news show where they made them argue with like the representatives of like the 5 biggest religions about the life of Brian and whether it's heretical or not. It's kind of unbelievable, but it was very shocking at the time it came out. But it's a good movie. Yeah, that movie's one of the reasons that when Gallery 1988 did their Monty Python show and I was able to meet Eric Idle, it was like a big deal because I was a Monty Python nerd as a kid. Like Monty Python was like the pinnacle of humor to me. All right, we're gonna clean up this. We're getting a little bit closer. A tiny bit closer here. Slow and steady, guys. That's how you do this stuff. I will say one of the things that is hard about comics is and a lot of people don't realize till they do them, is like the kind of patience involved. Unless you're David Hartman and you bust out comic pages in like an hour. But a lot of making comics is just, in my experience, it's been very like they take about as much time as you'd imagine generally. Like if you've ever started a comic page and you're like, gosh, this takes forever. They just do. they take forever. There's a couple people that they don't take forever for, but in general, it's like a really time consuming thing. And you got to be kind of okay with, like, here's the thing I was going to say. If they take less time, but you're able to get a quality page, great. But what you need to be okay with doing, that I've found, is setting a standard. And if your page isn't meeting that standard, being okay with going that extra mile to like make your page where you want it to be, and not copping out and being like, oh, it's close enough. And there's definitely a time where you have to kind of call it as done, but you want to make sure it's meeting. I think that's the big trick with becoming a decent artist or a decent cartoonist, is like being okay with taking the time to make it something you're happy with and that you're okay with, and that you're not just compromising. Like you're not just going, oh, well, it needs to get done, so it's done. think that's the difference between making really good work and making like meh work, is just take that extra step. Like for me, it's literally going to be, instead of finishing it tonight, which I wanted to do, I'll be finishing, the tones and maybe getting into color tomorrow. And so it's not quite what I was hoping, but that's what it needs to be done to the quality I want it done to. And I have to be okay with that. I don't know if that makes sense, but maybe I have the wrong tactic, Dylan said, I saw a video about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was going through some of the points, but then got into global veganism and it was like, all right, you've gone too far. You've lost me. Veganism is always interesting. I feel like there's a very compelling argument to not eating meat. And there's some very justifiable arguments, especially if you think there's sanctity to all life. But, I also feel really bad for, like, my wife was a vegetarian for the first 10 years we were together. And the amount of times, man, that she would just, decline to eat something and say she was a vegetarian. She's not anymore, but she would decline to eat something, say she was a vegetarian, and then she'd end up having to do this like 10-hour defense of vegetarianism. And she was never saying anything that was like pro-vegetarian. But like the amount of people who'd just be like, oh, so you're a vegetarian? So what if you eat vegetables that a bug died on? Are you really not killing animals? Because, what if like an ant died on a, like all the arguments, and you just hear them every time we'd eat with people. And I was like, anyhow, so it made me more empathetic to vegetarians and vegans, because it's like, man, it must be really rough to like every time you eat have to justify your existence. And hear all these people who feel guilty about eating meat like get all defensive. Which is funny because I eat meat, but like I don't feel the need to get in those long conversations. I know all the arguments and stuff. I don't know. But militant vegans and vegetarians can be tough. Okay, shading. But I think militant anything can be tough. All right, guys, we have this at 0. Well, not at 0, but like I'm showing you the page. That's as far as we're going to get tonight. We've done a stream for about 2 hours, guys. Let's have a good one. Let's have a good day tomorrow or today. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. If you liked this, hit the like button, hit the bell so you get notifications when we're about to go live. Make sure you're subscribed. And make sure you check out Empty Rooms, the album by this guy, Joshua Kemble, on Spotify and all the streaming platforms and stuff. I will see you guys on the next live stream. I appreciate you guys, and you rock. Dylan, I agree with you. All right. I will have a good one, and I hope you have a good one too. And I'm so tired. I was just saying I will have a good one. All right, guys. See ya. You're the best. You really are. And yes, have awesome good time. Bye.